Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell your brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, 'You have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself?' This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God." That is Luke 12:13 to 21, where Jesus is, if you go into Luke, you can see he's talking about quite a few different things. So kind of the words of Jesus before this parable, the words of Jesus after this parable continue to relate to, of course, faith and walking in right relationship with God. And as I approach this verse today, I think to myself as a business owner, I think, to whom much is given, much is required. I think we've all heard that before, whether you're a Christian or not. And as more is entrusted to me, is my sense of accountability growing with it? And that's an interesting question for me to consider, because at my age and stage of life, I certainly have not. I'm certainly feeling now the weight of all of the years of experience, skills, stories, mistakes, etc., that I have made, and what they're ultimately being used for. When I read the parable um, of the rich fool, which is what this parable is called, is I'm struck by a couple of different things. This is Jesus speaking, and so if you've been listening to how I'm going through this year, really trying to look at the Bible through more of like a biblical lens, what I'm seeing is, what is the life of Jesus, the very perfect individual, Son of God? What is that? How does that inform me as a business owner, how I should be managing my business and taking care of what's been entrusted to me? And so when I read the parable of the rich fool, these are Jesus's words in this parable. And parables were stories to try and illustrate a greater point. Parables were not based on a specific real life example. They were how Jesus explained things. And I think somewhere I learned, or I had read, or I had heard that, back before modernity, back in the ancient days, that's how people would pass information along to each other. They would do it in the form of stories so that people could remember, because there were no people weren't writing down books and publishing them and doing podcasts and making YouTube videos. So the easiest way for people to remember things was to hear it through stories. So, but in this parable, Jesus says the words, he says, "Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And so, as I dig into the word greed, to try and understand what it means, it would be the desire to have more, covetousness, or a word I don't use very often, but avarice, insatiable desire to gain, hoard, possess wealth, or material gain. And when Jesus says, so there's a bunch of things going on there, that life does not consist in an abundance. Well, an abundance is to exceed a fixed measure. So I get thinking about all of these things. And we're being told that the rich fool doesn't have a family or anyone else. The parable is about this specific individual. And so I think Jesus is trying to speak directly to the individual, not to the greater community at large. He speaks of the ruler, he speaks of the possessions of the ruler, and then he speaks of the outcome. And then for me, it's this idea that even what you have will be taken from you. And most people come to this, I think most people come to this parable and they think to themselves, wow, like, why should I just store up possessions for myself as a business owner? Maybe God's trying to convict me that I shouldn't have a big house and many cars and take vacations and try to accumulate as much of the material world as I can. So some people come to that parable and would look at that. I look at it a little bit differently. It speaks to me slightly different. And the way it speaks to me is, I think that when the rich young ruler says to himself, the ground of a certain rich young man yielded an abundant harvest. I really think of myself as a business owner like that. My harvest isn't necessarily the um, possessions that I have or the properties that I own or the physical materials. I really strongly believe it's the skills, it's the talents and the experience that I have, and what is it being used for? And if it's being used for myself, then what good is it actually? If I'm not using my experience, skills, and talents to serve other people, then what's the point of having them? And in fact, when I'm to pass away, or when my life here is done, if all I did was use my storehouse of abundance, again, I'm born in the first world, I've lived in a great city and a great country. But if all I did was just use all of the things that God has given to me for myself, then like, what good is it to anybody else? And I'm struck with this idea that, go back to Genesis and how I'm created in the image of God, that God's designed me for a purpose, specifically in the world. Like there are things that He's going to have me do in the world to subdue the world. But ultimately, it's going to come through serving people, and in serving people, that I get to know who He is. He wants to have a relationship with me. And so I think to myself, if God created me to have a relationship with Him, and He gets to know me through what I have in my hands, what He's placed into my hands to serve others as opposed to serve myself, then that's how I get to know Him. And if I just stored up these things for myself, then what results am I getting for myself? Let me try this again. If God created me in His image with a purpose and has given me at this stage of my life, I'm exactly where He wants me to be. If the goal is to know Him, if He wants to have a relationship with me, and He does that through me using my skills, talents, and experience to serve other people, then that becomes a life worth living. That becomes a life worth, when I'm not here, my ability to have served other people will outlast me versus somebody who takes all of their skills, their talents, and their experience and does nothing with it. They just store it up and store it up and store it up, and they never bother serving other people by removing friction in that person's life or by relieving them of some burden that they have or helping them carry a burden, if you will. Um, then what good is it? Because someone can come and go in this world and think, what's the point of even being here? I think that some people find themselves in that position where they think, my life isn't worth anything. I'm not doing anything interesting. I don't have anything to show for my life. And I think that that's a very selfish perspective to take. And I don't mean selfish negatively. I just mean it's very much an inward looking perspective to take when you could be saying in the same breath, here's what I have been given. I've been given my health. I've been given a few relationships. I'm in a certain age and stage of life. And so I just have accumulated some skills, some talents, some experience. Now, how can I go out into the world and use these things to serve other people? How can I make other people's lives better through the things that God has entrusted into my hands? Because then when you start asking yourself that question at a personal level, it answers the why am I here question. It gets rid of the whole there's no point to being here. Because if you saw yourself as valuable as God sees you, and you saw what you have in your hands as what He has given you to go out into the world and serve, I think you'd be very hard pressed to say there's no point. What's the point in all of this? But if we go up one level, which is the purpose of what I'm trying to do in these personal reflections, is to say, as a business owner, what does that mean? Well, that means there was a period of my life where I was scratching out a living, trying to feed a family and make something happen for myself. And then over time, I start to realize that at my age and stage of life, that there's an opportunity to provide some leadership, to provide some discipleship to not just my family, but actually the people that work under my care, the people I'm ultimately responsible for. And that the purpose doesn't need to be, for example, go to the moon or build the biggest real estate company or build the best product that everybody wants. The purpose is really to serve other people, and that in and of itself is sufficient. And so you might say, well, I want the cars and I want the houses and I want the vacations and I want the comfortable lifestyle. And to which I would say, great, maybe that's just how God has prompted your heart. But if you come to the Bible, if you come to read the Word of God, if you come to understand the life that Jesus led, you start to find that there's a deeper, more rich life waiting for you. if you can take what you have and invest it in other people through serving them, it's not a mistake that you are where you are. It's not a mistake that you have the things in your hands that you have. You might just need some perspective on how to use them. And I'm constantly reminded of that every single day. As recently as yesterday, we're in the middle of a leadership transition, and the individual that is working to recreate our company culture, maybe around more of his personality or his style. He's younger than me by about a decade. And there are just things that, I mean, I feel like I've hit every landmine in business, good, bad, and otherwise. But to be able to listen to him, to share with him what I think, but not to do it from me imposing it upon him, but just to serve him, to say, how can I help you? And yesterday, what it looked like was listening, was offering up not an answer, but based on my experience, some answers, some different solutions, some different options that he might pick from and take from and push them all together to ultimately get the answer that he's looking for. But had I chosen not to take that call, had I chosen not to do something as simple as having a context of how can I serve him today, he might struggle through trying to figure out how to make a decision that could produce some strife in the business, could produce some friction in the business, not because he wants all of that, but simply because no one's there, because I may have decided just not to help him out. But by agreeing to serve him, by using my experience and my talents to help him out, that's going to remove some friction from his life. He's going to be able to go into the business and use it to remove friction in the business that allows the people who are working under his care to do their job even better. And better doesn't necessarily mean more profitable. Better means that everybody in our business has value. And what limits that value is how much friction is in the business, how unstable the business is, or maybe how it's not durable and can't hold up under certain circumstances. So as leaders, we're called to go and remove that friction, to build better systems, to create stability, to create durability, so that if people are giving us 100% of themselves every day, or whatever percent they're giving, that they can get that out of the business for themselves, because everybody wants to be valuable and people know when they're valuable. And if your business isn't allowing people to be valuable because your business is stuck in the muck, as it were, then your job as leaders to get rid of the muck, because people have a lot to offer. And when we come with a servant's attitude to say, God created me, He's given me skills, talents, and experience, how can I use it to remove friction in my business, to create a more stable, durable business so that people can really thrive, that they can bring all of themselves to the business each day to produce the most valuable possible, then that becomes meaningful for everybody. It becomes meaningful for the business. It becomes meaningful for the people that are working underneath you. But if you don't have that attitude, if you're like the rich fool who just says, hey, man, we got business is great, got an abundant harvest, don't really care about how we got it, but we got it. And I have so much of it. What am I going to do? Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll tear down my storehouses, I'll build bigger ones, and I'll fill it. And then you're going to die. And then where does that go? Nowhere. It probably rots. People come and steal it. There's nothing left over after you're gone if that's your attitude, versus a a an individual who goes out to serve every day, that you'll never ever see the end of the lives that you touch. And when you're no longer here, you'll also never know how the decisions that you made that seemed inconsequential in the moment you were making them, you'll never get to see the end of what those decisions produced. And so for me, the parable of the rich fool is not so much challenged to say, you know, what do I do with the material possessions that I have, as much as it has to do with saying, God's entrusted me with skills, talents, and experience, and what is it being used for specifically? Um, as more is entrusted to me, is my sense of accountability growing with it? And I would say the answer for me is yes, but this parable reminds me of that, so that I'm constantly challenged to be accountable, not because God's up in heaven just waiting to reprimand me for not doing a good job, but instead He's up in heaven waiting for me to get to know Him even more. And the only way that happens is by using, I believe, by using what He's given me to serve other people. And in the act of serving other people, not only do we get to know ourselves a little bit more, but more importantly, we really do get to know God. And if you come to the Bible with that kind of attitude, looking for those sorts of themes, you're certainly going to find them. And you might find that it's a more meaningful experience, it's a more meaningful day, it's a more meaningful pattern